The first rays of dawn stretched across Maple Street, soft gold spilling into windows and warming the dewy lawns. Emma stirred under her blanket, blinking sleep from her young eyes. Something unusual tugged at her attention, a faint, rhythmic scratching at the front door. At first she thought it was the wind, maybe a loose shutter rattling, or perhaps a neighbor had stepped outside a little too early. But the sound repeated, deliberate and unhurried, almost polite in its persistence. Her brow furrowed. She pulled her blanket around her shoulders, listening carefully. The scratching came again, louder this time, a timid tap-tap-tap that seemed to echo through the quiet morning. Emma's curiosity overpowered her sleepiness. She slipped out of bed, careful not to wake her mother, and padded toward the door. Heart beating fast with a mixture of excitement and nervousness, she reached the window and peered through the blinds. Her eyes widened. There, sitting on the porch, was a dog. Not a house dog, neatly groomed and obedient, but a scruffy, thin creature with patches of fur missing, muddy paws, and eyes so sorrowful they seemed almost human. The dog froze when he saw her staring, ears twitching as if gauging her reaction. There was no aggression in his posture, only caution, loneliness, and a silent plea. Emma gasped softly. "Mom, there's a dog outside," she whispered. Her mother's voice, groggy and cautious, floated from the kitchen. "Don't go near it, Emma. It's probably a stray. You know how dangerous that can be." Emma's stomach twisted. She understood the caution, but she also felt something deeper, a pull she couldn't ignore. This dog wasn't just any stray. She could feel it in her bones. He was desperate for someone, anyone, to notice him. For 3 consecutive mornings, Emma awoke to the same routine. The scratching, the cautious wait, the eyes staring straight at hers. Sometimes the dog's tail would flick slightly, hesitant, as though testing whether she would come out or remain hidden behind the glass. Emma began leaving tiny pieces of bread on the porch. The dog approached cautiously, sniffing the offerings before retreating a step or two, as if ensuring no one was watching him too closely. Emma named him Shadow because he mirrored her movements from a distance, always staying just out of reach, patient and silent. Days turned into a week. The bond, fragile and unspoken, grew. Emma would rise early, careful to leave the house before her mother was fully awake to see if Shadow had come. Often he was already there, sitting patiently, almost like he had counted the hours until he could see her again. Emma noticed the scars on his legs, faint but unmistakable, telling a story she could not yet fully imagine. She wondered what he had endured before finding himself on her doorstep. Hunger, cold nights, cruel hands. It made her heart ache. Her school friends laughed when she told them about Shadow. "A dog, scruffy and dirty. Don't you have better things to do?" they teased, shoving lunch trays around and rolling their eyes. Emma ignored them. She didn't care if anyone else saw the value in this connection. She had a sense, an unshakable instinct, that this dog needed her. And the more days she watched him, the more she realized that perhaps she too needed him. One particularly foggy morning, Emma noticed Shadow shivering. The cold mist clung to his fur, wetting him through to the skin beneath. He had tried to curl into a ball, seeking warmth, but the chill was too harsh. Emma's heart twisted painfully. She ran to the kitchen, grabbed a towel, and held it tightly in her small hands. "Please, please come in," she whispered, voice trembling. Shadow tilted his head, ears flattening slightly in caution. Emma stepped closer, slowly, gently, offering the towel and a piece of bread. The dog hesitated, almost as if he remembered pain and betrayal from the past. But after long moments of silence, he edged forward, sniffing, unsure, before retreating a step, then another. Emma's mother finally came to the door, fully awake and alarmed. "Emma, step away. You can't just bring a stray in," she said, worry lacing her voice. Emma's resolve hardened. "Mom, he's cold and he's hungry. Please just let him stay for a little while," she pleaded. Her mother's gaze softened slightly, though still cautious. "Just for a bit, but don't let him near the carpets. And don't touch him too much. He could bite if he's scared." Emma nodded eagerly, almost unable to contain her excitement. Shadow's nose twitched as he inched closer to the warmth of the open doorway. When Shadow finally stepped inside, Emma's hands shook as she dried his fur. She could feel the tension in his small body, the years of neglect and fear woven into every muscle. He flinched at sudden movements, but Emma spoke softly, her words barely more than whispers. "You're safe now. I promise you're safe." Shadow's eyes, dark and soulful, met hers for a long moment, and Emma felt a connection so profound that tears welled up in her eyes. In that instant, she understood something essential. Trust wasn't given, it was earned, and she was determined to earn it. For hours, Shadow explored the small space, hesitant but curious. He sniffed corners, peered under tables, and occasionally let out soft whines, unsure if he truly belonged here. Emma stayed by his side, offering comfort in the gentlest ways possible. By the time the afternoon sun peeked through the windows, Shadow had settled near the couch, curling up with a tentative sigh. Emma's mother watched quietly from the kitchen, marveling at her daughter's patience and intuition. Maybe this one needs you more than you realize," she muttered softly, almost to herself. Emma smiled, hugging Shadow gently, feeling the beginnings of a bond that would change both of their lives. As evening descended, Emma and Shadow sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker on. The neighborhood had grown quiet again, the world unaware of the tiny miracle unfolding on the little porch of number 14 Maple Street. Shadow rested his head on Emma's lap, finally allowing himself to feel the warmth and safety he had been for so long. Emma whispered stories of hope, love, and endless adventures, knowing that somehow, in this small act of kindness, two lives had intertwined forever. And as she closed her eyes that night, Emma made a silent vow. She would never let Shadow face the world alone again. Whatever had driven him to the cold streets, whatever had hurt him before, she would heal. One day at a time, one gentle word at a time, Emma would show Shadow what it meant to belong. And Shadow, in turn, had chosen her, not by accident, but by some quiet, unspoken understanding that they were meant to find each other at this exact moment. The mornings after Shadow first stepped inside were quiet, filled with tentative glances and soft, almost imperceptible movements. Emma learned quickly that trust had to be earned. Shadow flinched at sudden noises, at the creak of floorboards, at the swish of her pajamas brushing against the doorframe. But every small act of kindness she offered, gentle brushing, soft whispers, and leftover scraps of food, broke down another layer of fear. He was like a puzzle, one that required patience and empathy. Emma, though only 8, felt the enormity of the responsibility and embraced it with all her heart. Each day, Emma waited for the first light of dawn with Shadow seated patiently by the door, his eyes dark and soulful. She would sneak into the kitchen, pour a little milk into a bowl, and lay it beside a plate of bread. Shadow would hesitate, sniff, circle, and sometimes retreat. But slowly he began to inch closer, learning that he could accept what she offered without fear of harm. Emma would murmur to him, "It's okay, Shadow. You're safe now. You don't have to be afraid." The dog's response was subtle, a tail wag, a slight tilt of his head, a quiet exhale, but it was enough to encourage her. At school, Emma tried to explain to her friends why she cared so much about this scruffy dog. "He's not just a dog," she whispered to her best friend Lily during art class. He's like me in a way. He's been alone and he's scared, but he's trying. He just needs someone to believe in him." Lily raised her eyebrows but didn't laugh. Maybe she understood more than Emma thought, yet the teasing persisted. "Why are you wasting time on a stray? He's dirty, probably sick." Other kids snickered. Emma ignored them. Shadow wasn't about appearances. Shadow was about heart. When Emma returned home, Shadow was always waiting, sometimes at the top of the porch steps, sometimes sitting by the mailbox as if counting the minutes until her return. Emma noticed subtle changes in him over those days. The way he followed her movements with more confidence. The way he let her gently touch his head without flinching. The way he started wagging his tail, albeit slowly, when she approached. Small victories, yes, but monumental in the world of trust and healing. Emma began to understand that patience was not passive. It was active, a constant demonstration of reliability and love. One rainy afternoon, the skis draped the town in a soft gray, droplets bouncing against the windows and soaking the streets. Shadow arrived at the door soaked, shivering violently. Emma's heart clenched. She ran to the kitchen, grabbed the thickest towel she could find, and opened the door. The dog froze, ears back, eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. Emma knelt, speaking softly, coaxing him. "It's okay, Shadow, I won't let anything hurt you." Slowly, painfully, he stepped inside, dripping water and fear, but he stepped. Emma wrapped him in the towel and stroked his damp fur, whispering assurances over and over. For hours, he huddled in her lap, trembling, slowly relaxing as he realized he was finally safe. In those long, rainy hours, Emma discovered more about Shadow than she could have imagined. His fur was rough and matted, his ribs slightly visible, evidence of starvation and neglect. His eyes held pain, confusion, and a cautious hope. Emma's small hands worked carefully to untangle the knots in his fur, her fingers gentle, her voice calm and soothing. She imagined the story of Shadow's past, cold nights alone on the streets, searching for food, running from danger. She thought of the times people might have been cruel instead of kind. Her heart ached, but it also steeled with resolve. This little dog would never feel that pain again. Evenings in the house became ritualistic. Shadow explored cautiously, sniffing every corner, every room, while Emma followed, narrating his journey in quiet tones. "This is the living room," she said one night. "You can rest here, and these are stairs, but don't worry, I'll help you if you want to try." Shadow would pause, look at her, and tilt his head as if he understood. He was learning to trust humans again, and Emma was learning the patience that came with loving a creature who had once only known fear. Each tiny step forward felt monumental. Neighbors began to notice the change, though quietly at first. Mrs. across the street mentioned to Emma's mother, "That dog seems calmer lately, and your daughter looks happier too." Emma's mother smiled but remained cautious. She was still wary of letting Shadow roam freely, knowing the world could be dangerous for an untrained stray. Yet even she couldn't deny the magic forming between the little girl and the scruffy dog who had arrived so timidly on the porch. There was something extraordinary about the bond, something rare and pure. Emma, determined to show Shadow love without overwhelming him, devised small games. She would roll a ball gently across the floor, encouraging him to nudge it with his nose. At first, Shadow watched, head tilted, hesitant, unsure if this was safe. Then, after repeated attempts, he pawed at the ball, pushing it tentatively back toward her. A triumphant wag of his tail followed, and Emma's laughter filled the room. "Good boy, Shadow, that's it," she cheered, feeling pride swell in her chest. Each playful moment, each shared laugh, chipped away at the fear in Shadow's heart. Nights were the hardest. Shadow would often pace near the window, staring into the darkness as if haunted by memories he could not articulate. Emma would sit beside him, offering her presence as a shield. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'll never leave you." Slowly, he began to curl beside her at night, no longer packing, no longer trembling as much. The bond that had begun with a simple scratch at the door had deepened into something unbreakable, a silent, mutual promise. Emma understood that Shadow's journey to trust her mirrored her own journey into empathy and courage. By the end of the second week, Shadow's transformation was visible. His eyes, though still cautious, held curiosity rather than fear. His tail wagged more confidently. He began responding to Emma's gentle commands, and the moments of playful interaction grew longer. Emma's patience and dedication had paid off, creating an unspoken language between them. In those quiet, precious mornings and rainy afternoons, Emma had learned the meaning of responsibility, compassion, and the profound joy that comes from healing another being. Shadow was not just a dog. He was a companion, a teacher, and a reflection of Emma's heart. The bond between them was now undeniable. Emma no longer felt alone when she woke to Shadow's expectant gaze. Shadow no longer felt the terror of the streets when he stepped inside. Together, they had created a world within a world, one filled with trust, warmth, and hope. And though the future was uncertain, full of unknown challenges and the scars of the past, they had each other, and that was enough. For the first time in a long while, both girl and dog could imagine a life where fear no longer ruled their hearts. The days that followed Shadow's first tentative visit inside the house were filled with a delicate rhythm of discovery, fear, and slow, cautious trust. Emma woke every morning to the familiar sight of him sitting at the porch, paws neatly tucked beneath him, eyes scanning for her first movement. The way he watched her always carried the same mixture of hope and uncertainty, as though each day was a test of her intentions, a measure of whether he could truly trust humans again. And Emma, heart swelling with empathy, understood that patience would be her most vital tool. One particular morning, the skies were gray and heavy, and a cold wind swept through the neighborhood. Emma, wrapped in her favorite blue sweater, approached the porch slowly, careful not to startle Shadow. He was there as usual, trembling slightly, ears flat against his head. His thin frame shivered from the early chill, and Emma's chest tightened. She bent down, her hands extended slowly. "It's okay, Shadow," she whispered. "You can come inside, it's warm. No one's going to hurt you." She left a small trail of breadcrumbs toward the door, a gentle invitation. Shadow paused, sniffing the air, head lowering slightly in uncertainty. He took a hesitant step forward, then retreated. Emma stayed perfectly still, allowing him the space to decide. Minutes passed like hours. Her mother peered from the kitchen window, concerned but silent, sensing the importance of this quiet negotiation between girl and dog. Emma whispered again, softly, a murmur meant to reassure more than command. "I promise, no one's going to hurt you. Come on, just a little closer." Shadow's tail flicked nervously, ears twitching, before he finally inched forward, paws crossing the threshold, leaving behind the cold porch and stepping into the warmth of the house. The first step inside was monumental. Shadow froze for a heartbeat, surveying the new environment, soft carpets, unfamiliar smells, the low hum of appliances. Emma crouched beside him, stroking his damp, tangled fur. "Good boy, Shadow, you're safe," she said, feeling tears prick her eyes. The trembling that had defined his body since the first encounter softened slightly, though his eyes never left hers. For the first time, he allowed himself to be vulnerable in a space that was meant to be safe. Emma's heart swelled with both relief and awe. Over the next few hours, Shadow explored cautiously, taking tentative steps into each room. Emma followed silently, narrating his surroundings. "This is the living room," she said, pointing to the couch. "You can rest here any time." Shadow sniffed, sat, and retreated, his body language cautious but curious. Emma's mother watched from the kitchen, a mixture of worry and admiration in her expression. She couldn't deny the quiet magic between the little girl and the scruffy dog who had wandered onto the porch days ago. Something profound was happening, trust being forged in the quiet intimacy of shared space. Emma introduced Shadow to simple routines. She placed a bowl of water in a safe corner along with a plate of bread, making sure he could access them without feeling trapped. Shadow approached slowly, sniffing the water and bread, eyes darting toward Emma for reassurance. Each cautious lap of water, each nibble of bread, was a small victory. Emma praised him softly. "Good boy, Shadow, that's it. You're doing great." Shadow's tail wagged just slightly at first, then more confidently, a subtle acknowledgement of the bond forming between them. Evenings were the most challenging. Shadow was uneasy with the house noises, the hum of the refrigerator, the squeak of floorboards, the occasional clap of a door. Emma would sit beside him, whispering soothing words, offering gentle strokes to calm him. She learned quickly that physical presence mattered more than words. Shadow's past had taught him fear, but Emma's unwavering attention showed him patience and safety. By lying quietly beside him, she communicated a message far more powerful than any spoken assurance. He belonged here, and he was no longer alone. Emma also noticed the scars on Shadow's legs and the slight limp in his walk. These were visible reminders of his past life, an existence marked by neglect, hunger, and possible cruelty. Her heart ached, but she refused to let these marks define him. Emma spent afternoons gently brushing his fur, untangling knots with painstaking care. Shadow flinched at first, pulling back instinctively, but he gradually allowed the contact, leaning into her hands with growing trust. Each stroke of the brush was a lesson in love, teaching him that human hands could heal instead of harm. Patience became a daily exercise, one that Emma embraced wholeheartedly. She learned to read subtle cues, a flick of the tail, a slight shift of the ears, a hesitation in his stance. Each small gesture was communication, an unspoken dialogue between girl and dog. Emma realized that Shadow's cautious behavior was not stubbornness. It was survival. He had learned to protect himself in a world that had been unkind. And now, through gentle persistence, she was teaching him the opposite. That trust could be safe, love could be reliable, and warmth could be consistent. The neighborhood began to take notice of Shadow's gradual transformation. Mrs., watching from across the street, commented to Emma's mother, "He seems calmer now, and Emma looks happier too." Emma's mother nodded, though she remained cautious. She knew the outside world still posed risks for an untrained dog, but she also recognized the extraordinary bond forming between her daughter and the scruffy animal who had arrived at their doorstep just days ago. Emma had created a sanctuary not just for Shadow, but for herself, a place where fear was replaced by love and curiosity replaced by hesitation. One rainy afternoon, as drops pattered softly against the windows, Emma noticed Shadow trembling despite the warmth. She knelt beside him, murmuring reassurance, and placed a blanket gently around his small frame. "It's okay, Shadow. You don't have to be scared," she whispered. Shadow leaned slightly into her touch, head resting against her knee, the first sign of true relaxation. That moment crystallized for Emma the depth of their connection. It was not just care she offered, but understanding, empathy, and unwavering support. She realized that trust, once broken, required patience, gentleness, and steadfast consistency to rebuild. By the end of the second week inside, Shadow's confidence had grown remarkably. He approached food and water with less hesitation, allowed Emma to pet him without flinching, and began to explore corners of the house independently. Each small victory felt monumental, proof that love and patience could heal wounds deeper than the eye could see. Emma celebrated each milestone quietly, aware that this was the beginning of a lifelong bond. Shadow was no longer a frightened stray. He was a companion, a friend, and a mirror of Emma's own capacity for kindness and understanding. Nightfall brought another quiet ritual. Emma would sit beside Shadow, reading softly from her favorite storybooks, her voice calm and rhythmic. Shadow would lie at her feet, sometimes curling beside her, sometimes resting his head on her lap. The quiet moments, filled with gentle words and shared presence, strengthened their bond in ways that overt actions could not. Emma realized that healing was a process, one that required time, patience, and consistent reassurance. And Shadow, ever cautious but increasingly trusting, was learning that love could be a safe, steady force in his life. By the end of the third week, a noticeable transformation had taken place. Shadow's eyes, though still cautious, sparkled with curiosity rather than fear. His tail wagged more confidently, and his movements reflected growing comfort in his new home. Emma had proven herself trustworthy, consistent, and patient, and Shadow responded with loyalty and gentle affection. Together, they had built a fragile yet resilient bridge of understanding, one that promised safety, warmth, and companionship in a world that had once been cold and unwelcoming. By the time the fourth week rolled around, Emma had begun to notice things about Shadow that she hadn't seen before. His once rough, patchy fur had begun to shine slightly under her careful brushing, though knots remained stubborn and scars lingered like shadows of his past. Each step he took carried a slight limp, a reminder of hardships endured before he arrived at her doorstep. Emma's heart clenched whenever she saw it, yet she refused to let those signs of past suffering define him. Shadow had survived, and that alone was proof of his resilience. Emma spent hours each day working gently to care for Shadow's scars. She would brush, untangle, and massage the sore spots, whispering words of encouragement. "It's okay, Shadow, you're safe. You don't have to hide from the world anymore." At first he flinched, pulling back at the slightest touch. But slowly, with consistent care, he began to lean into her hands, allowing the gentle pressure to soothe him. The scars remained, but they were no longer barriers. They were proof of survival and the start of healing. Emma learned that patience wasn't just waiting. It was actively demonstrating love every single day. Playtime became a critical part of the healing process. Emma started with small activities like tossing a soft ball across the living room floor. Shadow would watch, head tilted, unsure if he was allowed to participate. Slowly, he would paw at the ball, nudging it with tentative energy, then retreating as if surprised by his own courage. Emma would cheer softly, celebrating even these tiny victories. "That's it, Shadow. Good boy," she would whisper, and his tail would wag more confidently each time. Each small act of play helped erase the invisible chains of fear that had bound him for so long. Emma also observed Shadow's emotional growth. Initially, he would jump at every loud noise, flinch at unfamiliar touches, and avoid eye contact. But as the days passed, he began seeking her gaze, meeting her eyes with curiosity instead of fear. Sometimes he would tilt his head at her words, as if he understood the encouragement she offered. And slowly, he began to rest near her during quiet evenings, leaning his head into her lap while she read stories aloud. The transformation wasn't instantaneous, but each subtle sign, the wag of a tail, the relaxed sigh, the willingness to explore, was proof that Shadow was learning to trust. Emma's mother, once cautious, began to recognize the remarkable change in both Shadow and Emma. "You've done something incredible, Emma," she said one evening, watching Shadow tentatively curl up on the rug. "You've taught him that kindness exists and that people can be safe." Emma beamed. She didn't do it for praise, she did it because she had felt the pull of Shadow's need and wanted to make a difference. But hearing her mother acknowledge their progress made her feel even more confident in their growing bond. Visits to the veterinarian revealed the extent of Shadow's physical recovery. His ribs were no longer as pronounced, a testament to the meals Emma had carefully prepared for him. His coat, though still marred by scars, was fuller and healthier than it had been at their first meeting. The vet smiled at Emma's dedication. "He's lucky to have you," she said. Emma nodded shyly, stroking Shadow's fur. The scars would always remain, but they were no longer marks of weakness. They were proof of endurance, resilience, and the healing power of love. Beyond the physical healing, Emma also nurtured Shadow's emotional growth. She introduced small routines to give him structure, a designated feeding spot, short walks around the yard, gentle grooming sessions, and consistent praise for bravery. Shadow began to understand these routines as safe markers in his world. Slowly, the anxious packing and flinching at sudden movements diminished. Emma could see him relaxing more, even seeking her out for comfort at unexpected moments. Each gesture of trust, a paw resting on her knee, a soft nuzzle, was a triumph. Healing wasn't just about fixing what was broken, it was about fostering confidence and reassurance. The bond between them strengthened further during quiet moments of companionship. Emma would sit by the window with her sketchbook, drawing scenes of the neighborhood while Shadow lay beside her. Sometimes he would rest his head on her lap, eyelids heavy, occasionally glancing up as if to check that she was still there. Emma learned that Shadow's healing wasn't linear. Some days, he would retreat or flinch more than before. Other days, he would be playful, energetic, and affectionate. Patience was not just a tool, it was a necessity, and Emma had it in abundance. One memorable afternoon, Emma tried something new, a short walk around the neighborhood. Shadow hesitated at first, dragging his paws and looking back at the safety of the porch. But Emma spoke softly, encouragingly. "It's okay, Shadow, just a little step. I'm right here." Slowly, he began to move forward, tail low but wagging. Emma followed, walking beside him, guiding him with gentle words. Stopped, noticing the transformation of the scruffy stray dog who had once shivered in the cold. Shadow walked taller, more confident, eyes bright with curiosity. By the time they returned, he had learned that the world outside wasn't just a place of danger, it could also be explored safely. Evenings were filled with new rituals that reinforced trust and comfort. Emma and Shadow would sit by the fireplace, her reading aloud while he rested close, the warmth of the flames wrapping them both in a sense of security. Sometimes she would tell him stories aloud, not real stories, but ones she invented about dogs who had survived hardships and found happiness. Shadow's eyes would soften as he listened, ears twitching occasionally, and he would rest his head on her lap. Through these moments, Emma realized that healing was as much about emotional connection as physical care. Shadow was learning to trust life again. By the end of the month, the transformation was undeniable. Shadow's coat glimmered faintly under the morning sun, his limp had eased, and his demeanor had shifted from fearful and cautious to tentative but curious. Emma's patience and dedication had not only healed physical scars but nurtured emotional growth as well. Shadow was no longer a creature defined by fear. He was a survivor, a friend, and a companion. And Emma, through every whispered word, gentle touch, and patient gesture, had become his lifeline. Together, they had begun to rewrite the story of a dog who had once known nothing but hardship. Healing, Emma learned, was not a destination, it was a process. Every day was an opportunity to reinforce trust, provide comfort, and nurture love. Shadow, once an orphan stray shivering at a door, was learning that safety, warmth, and companionship were not fleeting. They were constants in Emma's unwavering care. And in turn, Emma was discovering the profound joy of nurturing a life that had been broken, teaching her lessons about resilience, empathy, and the quiet power of kindness. In the small, intimate moments of brushing fur, walking in the yard, and sitting by the fire, a bond was forged that neither time nor circumstance could break. By the time a month had passed since Shadow first cautiously stepped into Emma's home, the bond between the little girl and the scruffy dog had begun to radiate beyond the walls of number 14 Maple Street. Neighbors started noticing subtle changes in both of them. Emma, once quiet and reserved, walked with a newfound confidence, her eyes bright as she called softly to Shadow. And Shadow, once a trembling shadow of fear and uncertainty, trotted beside her, tail wagging cautiously but with pride. The transformation was quiet, unassuming, yet impossible to ignore. Mrs., who lived across the street, was the first to mention it aloud. "Your dog, he seems different," she said one morning to Emma's mother. "He's calmer, more alert, and he looks happy. And Emma, she's glowing." Emma's mother smiled but said nothing, choosing instead to watch Shadow from the kitchen window. Emma noticed Mrs. gaze and waved shyly. Shadow barked softly in response, the sound a small, confident note that filled the quiet morning air. Emma felt a swell of pride not for herself, but for the dog she had helped heal. Emma began taking Shadow on short walks around the neighborhood. At first, the walks were cautious, Shadow's head low, ears back, eyes flicking from passerby to passerby, wary of strangers. But Emma's gentle guidance encouraged him. "It's okay, Shadow, just a little further, I'm right here," she whispered. Slowly he began to explore, sniffing the grass, the sidewalks, and the occasional tree stump. Children on their way to school began to notice the pair, some stopping to watch, some laughing at the small, cautious wag of Shadow's tail. Emma always paused to smile politely, letting Shadow feel safe in the presence of strangers. The neighborhood children were particularly fascinated. At first they had teased Emma about caring for a scruffy stray. "Why do you spend all your time on a mutt?" they had asked. But now curiosity replaced derision. They would peek from behind fences or windows, watching Shadow's careful steps, his hesitant but playful interactions, and Emma's patient instructions. Some children began to cheer him on softly. "Go, Shadow," they whispered. Emma noticed the change in their attitudes, realizing that her dedication had transformed perceptions, not just of Shadow, but of herself and her compassion. Shadow's playful personality began to shine during these walks. He would chase fallen leaves, paw at small sticks, or trot proudly beside Emma, occasionally looking up as if to say, "Did I do that right?" Emma's laughter filled the streets, bright and clear. The laughter seemed to embolden Shadow, making him more adventurous with each passing day. Emma realized that healing was not only about recovery, but about discovering joy. Shadow's small victories, catching a stick, navigating a small puddle, or walking past a friendly neighbor, were celebrations of resilience and newfound confidence. The local animal shelter soon caught wind of Shadow's progress. A volunteer, Mrs., visited Emma's home after hearing from neighbors about the transformation of the once timid stray. She watched quietly as Emma brushed Shadow's coat, speaking in gentle, reassuring tones. "You've done an incredible job," Mrs. said softly. "He's learning trust because of you. Very few dogs recover so fully from neglect." Emma blushed, smiling at Shadow as he wagged his tail in response to the praise. It was validation, yes, but more importantly, it was a reminder that patience and love could create extraordinary change. Shadow's confidence grew with each passing day. He began to allow brief interactions with the children who had once mocked Emma. Hesitantly, he would let a small hand reach out to pet him, retreating only slightly before slowly leaning in. Emma stayed nearby, whispering encouragement. "Good boy, Shadow, you're okay, see. They're not going to hurt you." The children were amazed at his gentle temperament, especially given the scruffy appearance he once had. Shadow had become a symbol of transformation, and the neighborhood took notice. One memorable afternoon, while walking down Maple Street, Shadow's instincts revealed a hidden hero inside him. A toddler had wandered too close to the curb, oblivious to the cars approaching. Shadow's ears perked instantly. Without hesitation, he barked sharply, sprinting ahead and positioning himself between the child and danger. Emma ran, calling his name, heart pounding. The toddler's mother screamed, frozen with shock and fear. But Shadow stood firm, guiding the child back to safety with gentle nudges and protective barks. The small act of bravery cemented him not just as a companion, but as a hero in the eyes of the neighborhood. Word spread quickly. The story reached local newspapers and even a small segment on the evening news. Headlines read, "Scruffy Stray Saves Toddler, a True Hero Emerges on Maple Street." Emma watched the segment with wide eyes, Shadow resting calmly at her side. She hugged him tightly. "You're amazing, Shadow," she whispered. The neighborhood's perception had shifted dramatically. No longer was he just the scruffy dog on the porch. He was Shadow, the courageous survivor, the little hero who had earned the trust of both a girl and an entire community. The recognition brought unexpected visitors. Neighbors stopped by to offer treats, toys, and gentle pats. Emma allowed Shadow to approach at his own pace, always cautious not to overwhelm him. Each interaction reinforced his growing confidence and trust in people. Emma realized that Shadow's journey was no longer just about surviving, it was about thriving, about discovering his capacity for love, bravery, and joy. The little dog who had knocked timidly on her door was now a celebrated member of the community, proving that even the most broken among us could shine with patience, care, and understanding. Evenings continued to be filled with quiet, reflective moments. Emma and Shadow would sit by the fireplace, recounting the day's adventures in whispers and soft gestures. She would stroke his fur, praising his courage, while he rested his head against her lap, the bond between them deeper than ever. Emma marveled at the transformation. The timid, scruffy dog was now confident, playful, and deeply affectionate. Shadow's journey had become intertwined with hers, and together, they had created a world where fear was replaced by trust, uncertainty by courage, and loneliness by unwavering companionship. As Part 5 drew to a close, the neighborhood buzzed not just with admiration for Shadow, but with a subtle reminder of the power of love, patience, and second chances. Emma had taught those around her a lesson far beyond the scruffy dog on the porch. She had demonstrated that change was possible, that hearts could heal, and that courage could be found in the smallest of beings. Shadow, once an orphan stray, had become a hero, not just in the dramatic moments, but in the quiet, patient, and loving ways he engaged with the world around him. It was a bright Saturday morning when the events that would mark Shadow as a true hero began to unfold. Emma had woken early, the sun spilling through her curtains and painting warm streaks across her bedroom. Shadow, now a confident and playful companion, lay curled at her feet. The bond between them had grown immeasurably. He no longer flinched at sudden noises, instead following her movements with curiosity and trust. Today, Emma had decided to take him for a longer walk around the neighborhood, hopping to reinforce the routines and confidence they had been nurturing together. As they strolled down Maple Street, Shadow sniffed eagerly, tail wagging in gentle arcs. Neighbors smiled and waved, familiar with the little dog who had transformed from a timid stray into a courageous, loyal companion. Children who had once teased Emma now cheered softly, delighted to see Shadow strutting with pride, tongue lolling and ears perked. Emma felt a swell of pride, realizing the quiet influence her patience and dedication had had, not only on Shadow, but on the neighborhood's perception of what it meant to care for another being. The quiet, joyful morning took a sudden turn. Near the corner of Elm Street, a small toddler wandered off the sidewalk, mesmerized by a butterfly. Cars approached, unaware of the child's presence. Shadow's ears perked instantly, and his body tensed, instincts honed by both survival and trust in Emma's guidance taking over. He barked sharply, a commanding, urgent sound that drew immediate attention. Emma froze, heart racing, as Shadow sprinted toward the child, positioning himself decisively between the little one and imminent danger. Emma ran alongside him, calling his name, panic coursing through her veins. Shadow nudged the child gently, guiding them back toward the safety of the curb. The toddler's mother, frozen in shock and fear, rushed forward to scoop her child into her arms. Shadow barked once more, circling protectively until Emma reached them. "Good boy, Shadow, you did it," she cried, hugging him tightly. The mother, tears in her eyes, whispered through gratitude and disbelief, "You saved my baby, you saved my baby." Shadow wagged his tail slowly, sensing Emma's pride more than understanding the drama unfolding around him. The neighborhood buzzed immediately with admiration. Witnesses who had seen the act began talking, spreading the story from street to street. "Did you see that dog? He just saved a child," people exclaimed, shaking their heads in awe. Emma's mother, arriving moments later, embraced both her daughter and Shadow, pride and relief written across her face. "I think everyone's going to be talking about this one," she said, laughing nervously. Emma's cheeks burned, but not with embarrassment. Pride swelled within her chest. Shadow, once the timid stray who knocked on a door each morning, had become a symbol of courage. News of Shadow's bravery spread quickly. By the evening, a local reporter had arrived at Maple Street, eager to tell the story. Emma sat with Shadow on the porch, brushing his fur gently as the camera crew filmed from a respectful distance. "It's just, he's my friend," Emma said softly when asked why Shadow had acted so bravely. "I've been with him since he first came to our door. I think he just knew he had to help." Shadow rested his head on her lap, ears twitching slightly, as if he understood the attention but remained modest in his heroism. The following day, the story appeared in the local newspaper and on a small segment of the evening news. Headlines read, "Scruffy Stray Dog Saves Toddler. A True Hero Emerges on Maple Street." Emma's friends and neighbors beamed with pride. Children who had once mocked her dedication to a stray dog now approached her shyly, asking if they could pet Shadow. Emma smiled and nodded, always allowing Shadow to approach at his own pace. The shy, scruffy dog had become a local celebrity. But Emma knew that for Shadow, the recognition mattered less than the trust, care, and companionship he shared with her. Shadow's heroism transformed not only how others saw him, but how he saw himself. He began to carry himself differently during their walks, tail higher, steps more confident, eyes bright with alertness and curiosity. Emma observed subtle changes in his behavior. He would seek out children and neighbors for gentle interaction, respond eagerly to her voice, and explore new areas with cautious but growing confidence. Shadow's bravery was no longer just instinct. It was a reflection of the trust and love that Emma had nurtured in him. The recognition from the community brought small but meaningful gifts. Neighbors offered treats, toys, and blankets. Emma incorporated these into Shadow's routines carefully, ensuring he remained comfortable and unafraid. She noticed that Shadow now approached new people with a mix of curiosity and measured caution, an improvement that demonstrated both his courage and intelligence. Emma felt a profound sense of accomplishment, realizing that their months of patient care had not only saved a life, but transformed one into something extraordinary. Emma also began to reflect on the lessons she had learned from Shadow's journey. She understood that healing was a combination of patience, empathy, and consistent care. Shadow had arrived at her doorstep frightened, wounded, and uncertain of the world around him. Yet, through daily acts of kindness, gentle guidance, and unwavering companionship, he had grown into a brave, loving, and capable dog. Emma recognized that bravery was not always about dramatic gestures. It was also about trusting again after fear, stepping into the unknown with patience, and embracing love after pain. The bond between Emma and Shadow deepened further after the incident. Nights were filled with quiet companionship, Emma brushing his fur as he rested at her feet, recounting the events of the day in soft whispers. Shadow would nuzzle her hand, eyes half closed, a silent acknowledgement of the shared triumph and the unspoken connection that had brought them both healing. They had become partners in courage, each teaching the other lessons about trust, resilience, and the quiet, transformative power of love. Word of Shadow's heroism reached the local animal shelter. Volunteers visited, inspired by the story of the scruffy stray who had transformed into a neighborhood hero. "It's amazing what love and patience can do," one volunteer said, watching Shadow play gently with a ball in the yard. The shelter staff noted that Shadow's story could inspire other families to adopt and care for dogs who had been abandoned or neglected. Emma realized that through Shadow, she had not only changed his life, but also created a ripple effect of hope and compassion for others. In the following weeks, the neighborhood continued to celebrate Shadow quietly, with children stopping by to greet him during walks, neighbors offering words of admiration, and families inspired to show kindness to animals in need. Emma felt proud, but more importantly, she felt grateful for the lessons Shadow had taught her about resilience, empathy, and the courage it takes to heal after suffering. Shadow, once an orphaned dog shivering at a doorstep, had become more than a companion. He was a hero, a friend, and a living testament to the power of love. Evenings settled into a comforting routine once again. Emma and Shadow would sit by the fireplace, recounting the day's adventures in whispers and gentle pats. Shadow rested his head on her lap, occasionally licking her hand in gratitude. Emma marveled at the transformation. The timid dog who had once feared every sound was now a brave protector, a beloved member of the community, and a constant source of joy. The neighborhood buzzed with admiration, but for Emma and Shadow, the quiet moments together remained the most meaningful reward. The morning sunlight filtered gently through the curtains as Emma stirred, Shadow resting at her feet, tail flicking lazily as he dreamed. Their bond had strengthened through weeks of trust, play, and shared victories, but today felt different. There was an air of anticipation, a sense that life was about to change in ways neither of them fully understood. Emma's mother entered the room with a warm smile. "Emma," she said softly, kneeling beside her, "I think it's time we make this official. Shadow deserves a forever home, and so do you." Emma's heart leapt. She had longed for this moment ever since Shadow had first knocked timidly on their door. Shadow stirred, lifting his head and blinking sleepily as if he understood the excitement. Emma hugged him tightly, whispering, "You're going to be mine forever, Shadow. No more streets, no more fear." Shadow responded with a soft, tentative wag of his tail, leaning into her embrace. The words "forever home" held weight, a promise they both understood, and in that instant the last remnants of uncertainty melted away. The adoption process at the local animal shelter was brief but meaningful. Emma accompanied Shadow, carefully guiding him through the unfamiliar sights and sounds of the shelter with soft whispers and gentle pats. Shadow paused, ears flicking, nose twitching, yet he followed Emma obediently, trusting the bond they had built. Volunteers who had witnessed his growth smiled knowingly. "Look at him now," one said, watching Shadow nuzzle Emma's hand. "From a timid stray to a confident, loving dog, it's incredible." Emma felt pride swell in her chest, knowing every act of patience and love had brought them to this pivotal moment. The paperwork was signed with careful attention and the shelter staff congratulated Emma's family. "Shadow is officially yours," the volunteer said, her voice warm and encouraging. Shadow tilted his head, ears perked, as if sensing the significance of the words. Emma hugged him tightly again, whispering promises of walks, meals, warmth, and endless companionship. Shadow responded with soft licks to her cheek, his trust and love radiating silently. It was official. The dog who had once knocked timidly at a stranger's door had finally found a place to belong, permanently and unconditionally. The integration into family life was gradual but joyful. Shadow explored every corner of the house, confident now that every room held safety and comfort. He claimed a corner of the living room with a soft blanket and toys, returning frequently to Emma for reassurance and companionship. Meals became structured, with Emma carefully monitoring Shadow's diet and health. Walks extended longer and longer, each one reinforcing both his confidence and the bond with his human family. Shadow was learning that safety, warmth, and love were constants in this home, not fleeting moments to be wary of. Evenings were filled with rituals that strengthened their connection. Emma would brush his fur by the fireplace while recounting the day's events in soft, soothing tones. Shadow rested his head on her lap, occasionally nudging her hand in gratitude. Nights were no longer lonely or anxious for Shadow. He slept soundly, curled near Emma, comforted by the rhythm of their shared presence. Emma's mother often watched quietly from the doorway, marveling at the transformation and the deep bond forged between girl and dog. It was a testament to patience, love, and the quiet power of trust. Emma also began introducing Shadow to her extended family. Visits to grandparents, aunts, and uncles were met with cautious curiosity at first. Shadow observed, ears twitching, body tense. But Emma stayed close, whispering encouragement and offering gentle guidance. Slowly, Shadow allowed brief interactions, responding to soft pats and kind words without fear. By the end of the visits, he would settle comfortably near family members, tail wagging in gentle arcs, a living proof of the trust Emma had cultivated. His once frightened demeanor had been replaced by confidence and calm, a transformation admired by everyone he met. The community continued to celebrate Shadow quietly. Neighbors who had witnessed his heroic acts and his gradual recovery greeted him warmly during walks, children stopping to pet him gently under Emma's supervision. Shadow, ever cautious but now confident, accepted the attention with grace, occasionally nudging Emma's hand as if to check for guidance. Emma watched, heart full, as the dog who had once shivered on her porch became a symbol of hope and courage. She realized that his journey had inspired others, showing that love, patience, and empathy could transform even the most fragile lives. One memorable afternoon, Emma decided to create a scrapbook of Shadow's journey. She gathered photos, newspaper clippings, and small mementos from their walks and playful adventures. Shadow watched intently, nose twitching as she carefully placed each item on the pages. "Look at this, Shadow," she whispered. "This is your story, the story of how you went from lonely and afraid to brave and loved." Shadow leaned against her shoulder, eyes half closed, tail wagging slowly. In that quiet moment, Emma understood the depth of their shared journey, the milestones of healing, bravery, and unconditional love they had achieved together. As days turned into weeks, Shadow's confidence and personality continued to blossom. He would explore the yard freely, chase butterflies, and even learn simple tricks under Emma's patient guidance. Emma's laughter filled the house as he performed his first playful role or retrieved a thrown ball. Shadow's bravery and playfulness had become inseparable from his identity, proof that a life once marred by neglect could transform completely when nurtured with patience, understanding, and love. Evenings remained their sanctuary. Emma and Shadow would sit quietly by the fireplace, recounting the day's adventures and sharing gentle touches. Shadow rested his head on her lap, a subtle wag of his tail signaling his trust and contentment. Emma reflected on the months that had passed, the timid scratching at the door, the hesitant first steps inside, the careful trust building, the heroic act that captured the neighborhood's admiration, and finally, the official adoption. Every moment had been a testament to the power of love and persistence, shaping a life that had once seemed broken into something extraordinary. By the end of Part 7, Shadow's journey had reached a remarkable milestone. He was no longer astray, no longer fearful, no longer uncertain. He was Emma's companion, beloved by her family, admired by the community, and secure in the knowledge that he would never again face abandonment or fear. Their bond had evolved into something profound, a shared life, mutual trust, and an unbreakable connection built on months of patience, love, and shared triumphs. Shadow's forever home was not just a place, but a living testament to the power of compassion and the enduring magic of second chances. The sun rose over Maple Street, casting a golden glow across the yard where Shadow frolicked with a newfound confidence. Emma watched him from the porch, heart swelling with pride and love. He was no longer the timid dog who had scratched at her door on chilly mornings. He was a hero, a friend, a loyal companion who had found his place in the world. And yet, beyond the heroics and community recognition, the greatest transformation had occurred in the quiet, everyday moments they shared, moments of trust, comfort, and unwavering companionship. Shadow's mornings had become a ritual of joy. He would wait by the bedroom door, ears perked and tail wagging, ready to greet Emma with enthusiastic nudges and soft barks. Emma would rise, ruffle his fur, and whisper, "Good morning, Shadow. Ready for our day?" Together, they would venture into the yard, chasing fallen leaves, exploring familiar paths, and occasionally greeting neighbors who had come to know them well. Each day reinforced their bond, deepening the understanding that they belonged to one another, a truth that went far beyond mere ownership. The neighborhood continued to celebrate Shadow's story. Families who had witnessed his heroism shared his tale, children told friends, and local businesses occasionally offered treats or toys for the brave dog who had saved a toddler's life. Shadow, however, remained modest in his actions, unaware of the hero status the community had bestowed upon him. For him, the greatest joy was simple: the comfort of Emma's presence, the gentle rhythm of their days together, and the love that flowed freely within the walls of his forever home. Emma's school days were now brightened by the knowledge of Shadow waiting for her at home. When she recounted her day to neighbors or friends, Shadow would sit beside her patiently, listening with attentive eyes and a wagging tail. Her classmates began to see him not as a scruffy dog, but as a symbol of resilience, courage, and the rewards of patience and empathy. Emma realized that the lessons Shadow had taught her extended beyond the home. They had become a quiet inspiration for others, a reminder that even the smallest acts of care could change lives profoundly. One crisp autumn afternoon, Emma decided to host a small neighborhood gathering in honor of Shadow. Families gathered on Maple Street, children bringing toys, blankets, and treats, all celebrating the dog who had inspired them. Shadow approached cautiously at first, scanning the unfamiliar crowd. But Emma knelt beside him, whispering encouragement, guiding him gently as neighbors admired his calm confidence. Soon, he allowed the attention, accepting pats and gentle strokes, tail wagging slowly but proudly. Shadow's presence became a living lesson in courage, trust, and the transformative power of love. During the gathering, Emma's mother took a moment to reflect on the journey that had brought them here. She watched Shadow interact with the children, eyes bright, tail wagging, and body relaxed, a stark contrast to the timid dog who had once shivered on their porch. "It's incredible what love and patience can do," she whispered to Emma. Emma nodded, eyes shimmering with tears. She remembered every morning spent coaxing Shadow closer, every small victory, every fearful flinch that eventually gave way to trust. Their journey had been long, but the outcome was nothing short of miraculous. As the weeks turned to months, Shadow's role in the family became increasingly integral. He accompanied Emma on school projects, resting quietly nearby while she worked. He sat beside her during homework sessions, offering silent encouragement with a gentle nuzzle when frustration struck. Evenings remained their sanctuary, spent curled together by the fireplace, whispering shared secrets, recounting the day's adventures, and simply enjoying the comfort of presence. Shadow had become more than a pet. He was a confidant, a protector, and a constant source of joy and reassurance. Emma also began documenting their journey, creating a scrapbook filled with photographs, newspaper clippings, and mementos of their adventures and milestones. Each page told a story of resilience, courage, and love. Shadow would occasionally nudge her hand as she worked, as if reminding her that their story was alive, ongoing and worth celebrating every day. The scrapbook became a tangible reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness, the decision to open a door for a trembling dog, could ripple outward, touching countless lives in unexpected ways. The neighborhood continued to regard Shadow with admiration, but for Emma the recognition was secondary. What mattered most was the quiet bond they shared, the reassurance of his presence during difficult moments, the joy of shared play, and the comfort of knowing that they had healed each other's hearts. Shadow had once known only fear and uncertainty. Now, he thrived in love, courage, and companionship. Emma had discovered the profound truth that nurturing another being could also nurture oneself, forging a life filled with empathy, patience, and resilience. As the years passed, Shadow grew into a mature, confident, and deeply affectionate dog. His scars remained, reminders of a past overcome, but they no longer defined him. He was celebrated, loved, and secure, living each day fully in the warmth of his forever home. Emma, too, grew alongside him, her empathy, courage, and understanding deepened by the journey they had shared. The bond they had built through trust, patience, and love became unbreakable, a silent promise that neither would face the world alone again. On quiet evenings, Emma and Shadow would often sit together in the yard, watching the sun dip below the horizon, casting long shadows and painting the sky in hues of gold and pink. Shadow rested his head on her lap, eyes half closed, ears twitching occasionally at distant sounds. Emma stroked his fur gently, whispering softly, "We did it, Shadow, we made it. Forever together." Shadow responded with a slow wag of his tail, his presence a warm, steady reassurance. The journey had been long, filled with challenges and fears, but it had culminated in a bond stronger than anything either could have imagined. In the community, Shadow's story continued to inspire acts of kindness. Families who had been touched by his journey began volunteering at shelters, helping animals in need, and demonstrating patience and care to all creatures. Emma understood that their story had transcended the boundaries of their home. It had become a beacon of hope, illustrating the transformative power of empathy, dedication, and unwavering love. Shadow had not only found a forever home, but he had also left an enduring legacy, proving that even the smallest acts of kindness could ripple outward to change lives. Years later, long after the heroism that had initially brought attention to Shadow, Emma would reflect on the journey that began with a scruffy dog scratching at her door every dawn. Shadow, now older and grayer around the muzzle, still approached her each morning with the same gentle nudges and soft barks, a faithful companion who had grown alongside her. Together, they had created a life defined not by fear, but by trust, courage, and an unbreakable bond. And though time would continue to pass, the love between them remained eternal, a living testament to the power of compassion and second chances. In the end, the story of Emma and Shadow was not simply about a dog or a girl. It was about the quiet heroism found in patience, the courage discovered in trust, and the love that could heal even the deepest wounds. Shadow had arrived on her porch a timid, orphan dog, but through care, empathy, and unwavering commitment, he had become a brave, joyful, and beloved companion. Emma had learned that life's greatest rewards often come not from grand gestures, but from the small, consistent acts of love that transform hearts, both human and animal alike. And so, every dawn, Shadow still waited by the door, not out of fear or uncertainty, but in joyful anticipation of another day spent with the girl who had believed in him, the family who had embraced him, and the world that had finally recognized his worth. Emma would open the door, greet him with a smile, and together they would step into the day, forever friends, forever companions, forever home.